Well, hello there. Let's talk about tariffs, those big bold ones introduced by former President Donald Trump. The idea was to protect American industries and bring back jobs. By making imported goods more expensive, the goal was to encourage buying American. Think of it like this. If a shiny new gadget from overseas costs more, you might buy American. The goal was to boost local manufacturing and reset global trade. But global economics is like a giant Jenga tower. Pull one block and the whole thing wobbles. The tariffs were a massive shakeup. The plan was to make America stronger, but it turned out more complicated and expensive. The stage was set for a major economic experiment, still being debated today. So, the tariffs were in place like new rules in a game. But what happens when the new rules make the game harder for your own team? That's kind of what started to happen with America's supply chains. A supply chain is basically the journey a product takes from raw material to your doorstep. These tariffs, meant to punish others, started to cause some serious headaches at home. Suddenly, American companies that relied on imported components found their costs shooting up. It wasn't just the finished goods facing tariffs, it was often the essential nuts, bolts, and microchips needed to make things in America. The result was a bit of a mess, or to put it mildly, supply chain chaos. Businesses scrambled to find new suppliers, sometimes from countries not hit by tariffs, but that takes time and money. The smooth, predictable flow of goods that businesses depend on was suddenly choppy and unpredictable. Now let's zoom in on one industry that was really buzzing before all this: electric vehicles, or EVs. Everyone was talking about them. The future of transport, clean energy, American innovation leading the way. Companies like Tesla were already big names, and new players like Rivian were gearing up to join the race. The EV industry, you see, relies heavily on a global supply chain, especially for one crucial component: batteries. A lot of the world's battery production, and the raw materials needed for them, like lithium and cobalt, comes from overseas, particularly Asia. So, when tariffs were slapped on goods from China and other places, EV batteries and their components suddenly became more expensive for American car makers. This is a big deal because the battery is one of the most expensive parts of an electric car. If the battery cost goes up, the price of the whole car goes up. And if EV prices go up too much, fewer people can afford them, which slows down the whole green transition everyone was so excited about. The dream of rapid EV adoption hit a significant speed bump, courtesy of trade policy. The tariffs, designed to protect American industry, ended up putting a strain on one of its most promising and future-oriented sectors. Amidst this tricky tariff environment, some companies tried to get ahead of the curve. Take Rivian, for example, the American company making those cool electric pickup trucks and SUVs. They saw the storm clouds gathering on the trade horizon and decided to act. Before the tariffs really started to bite hard, Rivian reportedly made a very clever move. They started stockpiling EV batteries. By buying up these batteries in advance, Rivian aimed to insulate itself, at least for a while, from the rising costs and potential supply shortages caused by the tariffs. This foresight helped them navigate the initial disruptions somewhat more smoothly than some others who might have been caught off guard. It was a strategic play to ensure their production lines could keep rolling. However, even smart moves like stockpiling can only provide a temporary buffer. The broader, sustained pressure of the tariff environment still took its toll. It wasn't just the newer EV companies like Rivian feeling the heat. The established giants of the American auto industry, the big names from Detroit, also found themselves in a tight spot. These companies have incredibly complex global supply chains, built up over decades. They source parts from all over the world to build cars in America. When tariffs hit, it sent ripples, or more like waves, through their entire operations. The automotive sector, a backbone of American manufacturing, was suddenly facing significant pressure and rising costs, all thanks to these new trade rules. For instance, General Motors, or GM, had to make some tough calls. Their Durant Guild initiative in China, which was set up to import US-made vehicles, reportedly had to halt orders and shipments. Similarly, Dodge, another iconic American brand, announced it would discontinue the Canada-made Charger Daytona RT for the 2026 model year, with the tariffs being a contributing factor. The industry as a whole started re-evaluating its supply chain and production strategies. Now let's talk about a company that's practically synonymous with American business: Amazon. Given their massive global operations and reliance on a vast network of suppliers for the millions of products they sell, you can bet they were watching these tariff developments very closely. When the cost of importing goods goes up, a company like Amazon, which deals in enormous volumes, feels that impact significantly. The brief for this essay specifically mentions Amazon's decision to shift operations abroad due to tariffs. Facing increased costs on goods imported into the US, particularly from China where many consumer products are manufactured, would naturally lead any prudent business to explore ways to mitigate these expenses. This could involve diversifying sourcing, exploring manufacturing in other countries, or adjusting logistics networks. For a company as vast as Amazon, shifting operations doesn't necessarily mean packing up its Seattle headquarters. It's more likely to involve strategic adjustments in its incredibly complex supply chain. The goal would be to maintain competitive pricing and product availability for customers, even if it means relying less on traditional US-centric import channels for certain goods. The pressure from tariffs adds another layer of complexity to an already intricate global balancing act for companies like Amazon. The impact of these tariffs wasn't just confined to big car companies or e-commerce giants. It was more like a domino effect, rippling through many different sectors of the American economy. Think about agriculture, for instance. When the US put tariffs on goods from other countries, those countries often retaliated with their own tariffs on American products. And guess what one of America's biggest exports is? Agricultural goods, things like soybeans, pork, and corn. So, American farmers, who were hoping for good times, suddenly found it much harder and more expensive to sell their produce overseas. This retaliation meant that American farmers lost access to important markets, or faced such high taxes that their products became uncompetitive. Beyond agriculture, many other American businesses felt the pinch. Companies that relied on imported steel and aluminum, for example, saw their raw material costs go up because of tariffs on these metals. The idea was to protect American steel and aluminum producers, but it also made things more expensive for all the American industries that use these metals. The broader trade war also created a climate of uncertainty. Businesses hate uncertainty. So when we add everything up, what was the real cost of these tariff tussles for the American economy? It's a complex picture for sure, and economists are still debating the exact figures. But one thing became pretty clear. American businesses and consumers ended up footing a large part of the bill. The idea that other countries like China would pay for the tariffs? Well, that's not really how tariffs work. In most cases, it's the importers in the country imposing the tariff, that's American companies, who pay the tax to their own government. And then, they usually try to pass that cost on. This means that American consumers often ended up paying higher prices for a whole range of goods, from washing machines and clothes to electronics and even food. While some specific American industries might have seen some benefit from the protection offered by tariffs, many others suffered from higher input costs or retaliatory tariffs on their exports. The promise of bringing back manufacturing jobs in a massive wave also didn't fully materialize in the way some had hoped. Ultimately, the tariffs introduced a lot of friction into the gears of the American and global economies. So after all this disruption, what are the big takeaways? What lessons can America learn from this whole tariff adventure as we sit here in May 2025? Well, one of the clearest lessons is that trade policy is incredibly complex, and using tariffs as a primary tool can have a lot of unintended consequences. While the aim might be to protect domestic industries, the reality is that these measures can also harm other domestic industries, raise costs for consumers, and invite retaliation from other countries, which hurts American exporters. Another key lesson is the sheer interconnectedness of the global economy. It's virtually impossible to isolate the US economy from the rest of the world, especially when it comes to supply chains. Many American products rely on components and raw materials from other countries, and many American businesses rely on selling their goods to customers overseas. Policies that try to build walls around the American economy can end up trapping businesses and consumers inside with higher costs and fewer choices. Perhaps the most important lesson is the value of stability and predictability in international trade. Businesses need a clear and consistent set of rules to operate effectively. Constant changes in trade policy, threats of new tariffs, and ongoing trade disputes create an environment of uncertainty that chills investment and slows economic growth. Moving forward, Finding ways to resolve trade disputes through negotiation and international cooperation, rather than unilateral tariff actions, might prove to be a more sustainable path to prosperity for everyone involved.